Senator from Indiana.
Madam President, thank you. Madam President, as I look at my watch, the clock is ticking toward midnight. Midnight becomes March 1st, and that's the point at which the sequester kicks in. This sequester, which is across-the-board cuts, hardly massive, when this year it will be about 1.2% of our total budget. And so I'm not sure how the word massive can be used with any credibility, but nevertheless, this is going to happen. Republicans have proposed a way to address the president's very concerns, the very concerns that have been stated on this floor, that across the board is no way to govern, because it doesn't separate the essential from the non-essential. And I think we as Republicans couldn't agree more. It's not the best way to govern, because it does treat everything as an equal basis, and basically says that every federal program, no matter what its performance over the years, doesn't deserve a look in terms of how to adjust that for its lack of performance. It doesn't separate what the essential functions of the federal government are from the, this is what we would like to do but right now, from the dysfunctional. And to say that this government and the out-of-control spending that has occurred over these last several years is totally functional, and that every penny that we have spent is wisely spent and done so in the interest of the taxpayer and protecting their hard-earned dollars, and that the money we're extracting from them through ever-increasing taxes, some of which just happened less than 2 months ago, on every American's paycheck was reduced. So it's not just the millionaires and the billionaires that took the hit. $620 billion over 10 years of money comes out of Americans' paychecks. And so, one, to say that what we're doing is massive when it amounts to, this year, a 1.2% cut, when virtually every business in America, every family in America has had to tighten its belt given the recession and the slow economic growth, when we continue to have 23 million unemployed or underemployed people in this country, and to simply say we don't have a spending problem, as the president famously said, defies common sense. We don't need fancy explanations or fancy words like sequester to let the American people understand what's happening here. They see their states having to tighten their belt. They see their companies that they work for having to tighten their belt. As families, they see themselves having to cut back on some of their spending or some of their future plans because they no longer can afford to do it. The only entity they see in the United States not addressing a fiscal imbalance is the United States government. And so, in an attempt to deal with this, a year and a half ago, this Congress passed the so-called sequester. And the sequester was a fallback in case we weren't able to come to grips with the problem that we have and reach an accommodation, an agreement on how to address it in the best way possible. Now, this was the fail-safe. And all the attempts, starting with the president's own commission, which he rejected that program, with the Gang of Six proposals, the super committee of 12, all the efforts, many of them on a bipartisan basis. For whatever reason, they did not succeed. And so what was put in place to drive a solution didn't drive a solution. And as a result, here we are with the sequester. But to say that this sequester, cutting this year 1.2%, is going to make the sky fall and cause a total economic meltdown and keep people from getting on their planes and keep us from ordering meat because meat inspectors can't go to the meat processing plants to certify the quality of the meat, and all the things that the president is out campaigning for, his own program. It was the president's idea. Now, maybe it was his staff, but it certainly had to agree to it. It was proposed by the president, and now he's out campaigning against it. In fact, it wasn't that long ago he said if it didn't go into effect, he would veto it. So there's been a real change here, and I won't go into the motivations for all of that. And there's also talk about balance. Balance is a code word for new taxes and for more taxes. It has been said over the past couple of years during the campaign and leading all the way up to the so-called, well, the fiscal cliff vote, that Republicans would refuse to give in on any kind of tax increase, even if it was on millionaires and billionaires. In the end, the president won that battle, and Republicans supported it. And so, even though we did not believe that was the best way to go forward to get our economy to grow and to provide the kind of economic growth that we are all looking for, we supported. Here, just 2 months later, the same tired phrase that Republicans won't take 1 penny from the rich when they just took $620 billion from the rich. And therefore, what we need are more taxes on the American people to achieve balance. It seems that the White House has an obsession with solving this problem through increase in taxes and not wanting to take the hard decisions to cut even 1.2% of our total budget, 2.4% in succeeding years. Now, to say that we cannot, through our oversight responsibility, find 2.4%, and this year 1.2%, of waste, of corruption, of misuse of programs that no longer are viable. Maybe they were well-intended in the past, but they certainly have not proven themselves worthy of asking taxpayers to keep sending their hard-earned money to Washington in order to cover that spending. When Senator Coburn, Senator Toomey, when many of us, I've been standing here every day at virtually every session, basically saying, just through waste and ineffective programs, we can easily come up with this amount of money. Everyone else in America has had to do it, and why can't we? Now, the charge that we have heard over and over is that this is such a terrible way to address it, that we need the flexibility so that these agencies can move the money around and take the money from the non-essential programs to keep the security at the airports and the FAA and the air traffic controllers and the meat inspectors and the others that are essential in order to keep them from having to take the hit. We came up with the idea, Senator Toomey and Senator Inhofe, that, okay, let's give the executive branch the flexibility. That's what they've been crying for all these years. Now, if you have to have the sequester, just don't do it across the board, because it forces us to do things we don't want to do. But if we had the flexibility, if you could give us the flexibility, then we could move the money within the accounts. We'd still reach the same amount of cuts, the 1.2%, but we would have the flexibility to not have to scare people or keep people waiting in lines at airports for 4 hours and do all the things that, all the doomsday scenarios that have been proposed by the president and his cabinet members. And so we bring that forward, and then suddenly 180% reversal on the other side, which basically says, no, 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 we don't want flexibility. That's not the way to do it. Well, what do you want? I mean, yesterday you wanted flexibility, today we gave it to you, and today you're saying, no, we don't really want that. So it sounds like what they really want is not a solution to this problem without a big increase in taxes. Now, this word balance, which I said is a code word for taxes, I just came from a joint economic committee where a very respected economist, Michael Boskin, said, you know, the administration defines balance. Well, he didn't say the administration. I want to be correct here. He said balance is not 50-50 if you want economic growth, because every dollar you raise in taxes is a hindrance to economic growth. He said, I'm not saying there shouldn't be increases in taxes, but if the ratio should be, and I quote him, 5 or 6 to 1, If you want to position this country for growth, you need about 5 to 6 times the amount of spending control as taxes increased. And so balance 50-50, according to a very respected economist and many others. I don't know of anybody who said raising taxes encourages growth because it takes money out of the private sector and gives it to the public sector. But rather than get into that argument here today, what the president defines as balance is simply ever more taxes to solve our problem when we know that after 4 years of effort here, that hasn't worked and it will not work. But let me say this. I've been saying from this platform, I've been saying from everywhere I can open my mouth and say some words where people will listen, that we need to move to the solution to the problem. And the solution to the problem involves, I believe, 3 or 4 essential elements. And I think there is widespread consensus on this among liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, economists, and others. Unless we address that which is growing out of control, which is our mandatory spending, no matter what we do on the spending level, and no matter what we do, what else we do, we're not going to solve this problem. And we're going to keep careening from short-term fix, short-term measure to the next one, from fiscal cliff to fiscal cliff. Already we have another cliff, which people haven't paid much attention to, at the end of this month, where we have to fund the government for the rest of the year. And that'll be another drama, soap opera drama, played out before the American people. And then in May, we hit the debt limit. None of this is necessary. None of this had to happen. If we had taken the steps that we knew we needed to take, that was presented in the Simpson-Bowles presentation to the president years ago, and unfortunately rejected, that basically said, we're headed for catastrophe. We're headed for insolvency because this mandatory spending is growing out of control, and the amount of discretionary spending we have, which we can control here, is ever shrinking. Yes, we need to sort out the fat, the duplication. My colleagues here and I have been laying out things that I don't think any American who looks at it carefully would say, of course we don't need that. Of course that's not an essential function of the federal government. It's had a miserable performance as a program. And why do we keep throwing money at it? Particularly at a time of austerity when so many people are out of work. Yes, we need to do that. But that needs to be coupled with what I think there's almost full agreement on, the need for comprehensive tax reform. And that's where closing the loopholes, which Republicans are willing to do, in order to lower the rates to make us more competitive and make our tax code much simpler and much fairer. That needs to happen. And of course, it can't happen if we take closing loophole money and use it for spending, which is what the president wants to do, instead of using it to make our code simpler, fairer, and make us more competitive around the world, and to promote growth. That's a proven process. And unless we put that together with some regulatory reform, but most important of all, and most essential of all, is to address the runaway mandatory spending, which not addressed will undermine the sanctity and the solvency of entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. The trustees, don't trust a Republican conservative saying this, the trustees of the programs have said, you've got to deal with this, and the longer you put it off, the tougher it is and the more painful it will be. And this morning again from Dr. Boskin and even Dr. Goolsbee, the president's former economic council head, have said, you've got to do this. You've got to take it on. And you were taking it on to, 1, save the programs, and 2, save the country from bankruptcy. And number 3, give us the opportunity to have funds to pay for the essential functions of government. We're not against government. We want it to be more lean, more efficient, more effective. My state has taken measures that quintuple what is being talked about here. We ended up achieving a surplus. We have a AAA bond rating. We've made our state government the most efficient, effective government in terms of use of the taxpayer dollars of any state in the country. It can be done, and it can be done here. But what we have that's different than what our states have is the fact that mandatory spending, that spending which we have no control over, is eating our lunch. And until we step up and deal with it, we're not going to solve this problem. We're going to keep careening from crisis to crisis to crisis. And so the real issue here is whether or not, at this point, with the sequester going in place, can we not step up and sensibly adjust it through flexibility in terms of how we reach that goal? And can we summon the will and the political courage to do what we all, I believe we all know that we need to do? And that is simply to do what's right for the future of America, America's interest, not our own political interest. And finally, in my opinion, that can't be done, despite all the efforts made here, many on a bipartisan basis. Simpson-Bowles was bipartisan. Gang of Six was bipartisan. Committee of 12 was bipartisan. It's not true that we're at a standoff in terms of how to go forward here. What we haven't had is leadership from the White House. Something of this magnitude cannot be done without presidential leadership. And the president has refused to do anything other than plea on a campaign basis for yet ever more taxes, which he calls balance. So that's our challenge. We need you, Mr. President, to lead the way. We will work together with you in putting together a package which achieves the right ratio. We will work together to do what's right for the future of America and not what's right for our political future this year and next. So I guess we're pleading with the president. Like presidents of the past, Ronald Reagan, a Republican, and Bill Clinton, a Democrat, took on the toughest issues. And together we worked forward for the benefit of our people and for the future of this country. And we made enormous strides in that regard, but it would not have happened had the president not become engaged. And at this point, the only engagement the president has made is to call for higher taxes and go out and campaign against those of us who are trying to sincerely address this problem. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.